What is the creepiest thing you've seen in the woods, or in the mountains, or in deserts, or caves, or in small towns, or in remote or rural areas, or while on large bodies of water, or while on an aircraft or a nautical vessel? I'd been at football training with a few of my cousins when I was about 10 years old. We decided to take a walk before our parents picked us up, so we went along the canal towpath. My cousin looked down in the canal and saw a really nice jacket floating along, and being a weird scavenger person decided to reach in to fish it out. Well, the jacket turned over. And so did the man wearing it. He also had no face left. Not gonna lie, that was rough. This took place in the Australian bush around 10:11 at night. I was 17, leading a staggered column of about 60 cadets to our detachment campsite. Due to light discipline rules, only myself at the very front of the group and the other flight commander at the rear had torches on. This was so that any vehicles coming along the trail could see us, and so that most of the cadets could maintain their night vision. We were camouflaged up and thus difficult to see at night. As we walked along, I periodically looked to my sides, and kept seeing what looked like dewdrops on the ground. Almost like tiny blue gems glinting in my torchlight either side of the road. I had to maintain my position in the formation, so I couldn't get a good look at what they were. However, after a while we stopped for a very brief break, and I took the opportunity to have a closer look. Walking over to the side of the trail, I spotted a small cluster of the diamonds and focused my head torch on them. Rather than seeing diamonds or dewdrops or anything remotely pleasant, I instead saw a group of about 5 large spiders just crouching in the leaf litter and staring at me. They looked like huntsmen's, which are about the size of an adult's hand. Sweeping my head around, I realized there were thousands of the things. All over the ground, some on the trunks of trees, and everywhere around me, glaring at the light affixed to my head. I had a very brisk walk back to the formation and attempted to play it cool while screaming in my head. Being a massive arachnophobe, I have no clue how I managed to set up a tent and spend the next week in that cursed forest. Posted about this before, but back when I was a kid, some friends and I came across people in robes chanting around a campfire out in the woods on the edge of the town we lived in. We were staying at a friend's house for a birthday party / sleepover and went for a late night walk. This was back in the late 80s during the Satanic Panic. Looking back now, I'm sure it was just some teenagers goofing around, but at the time it scared us out. One of the girls with us had a panic attack and started hyperventilating. Got pretty serious, but we finally managed to get her calmed down. It's 2 a.m. We're in a tent in the woods in Maine. I'm about 8. Mom, there's something creeping around outside the tent. MMMPH, you're dreaming, go back to bed. Mom, there really is something out there. No. There isn't. Just then, something whaps on the side of the tent, hard enough to shake the whole thing. And my mother, who is entirely too tired to deal with this shit, sits bolt upright and whaps right back in the same spot, and from outside the tent, we hear, meow. Not sure how creepy this is, but I was on a week-long camping trip with some friends and I woke up with a weasel sitting on my chest looking at me. I never knew I could scream that loud. Felt like running at night last year because the park near where I live gets all pretty with the lights on in the dark, so after 5 minutes into the exercise, I feel the need to adjust my shoes because I forgot to wear a longer sock and they were hurting my ankle. I look up and I see this dark silhouette running towards me at full speed wearing a hoodie about 50 meters away. I was on the left side of the street and he was on the right, so it was clear he was running towards me. I legit almost shitted my pants and felt an adrenaline surge. I thought about fighting him if he got any closer, but in a blink of an eye, the person trips, falls face planted on the ground, and starts crawling in my direction again. Dude is committed, I'm leaving. I was Boy Scout, camping with my group of older buddies and an adult leader in Yellowstone. We had been backpacking for 2 days and stopped in a beautiful little clearing at the bottom of some huge tree-covered hills. The sun started to set, we made a fire, and I began to climb up into the trees to dig a hole and fill it back up. You know what I mean. As I squat there, basking in moonlight and appreciating the glow of fire among the trees, I looked up to a ridgeline a few hundred yards away where the moon was rising, and I shit you not, I saw a big cougar crest the hill and just watch our fire. It was likely no danger to me, but seeing that outline, that unmistakable shoulder crawl they do, was haunting. I watched it sit there for a good 15 minutes until I was called back by my worried buds. I pointed the cat out at them when I got done because it was still just watching us. Crazy. My girlfriend and I were hiking along some abandoned railroad tracks and we get to a small bridge going over a little creek. I'm about to go explore under the bridge when she points something out. I look over and in the woods across from us I see a guy. I'm like whatever and keep headed down to the creek area, and then the guy stands up and he's naked. We immediate backtrack pretty quickly to get away from there, and once we're like 1 minute down the trail I look back and this naked dude is just standing in the middle of the trail watching us walk away. Walking on the beach with my boyfriend and we had walked to a giant rocky cliff to make out. Somebody was just gazing at the ocean, crying and shaking. Mind you, this is late at night, like around 9:30 p.m. We asked him if he was okay. He apologized and practically ran back down the cliff, away from the dangerous areas. My boyfriend and I watched him until he reached the public area and decided to call it a night. I'm pretty sure he was going to jump. In order to get back home from a popular kebab restaurant I need to walk a short path through the woods. Along the way there is an extremely old abandoned partially collapsed chapel, and occasionally I'll stand there for a few seconds admiring it. It's quite beautiful in its own way. One day during winter season I decided to rest there for a minute, so I placed my kebab on the bench right next to the chapel and just stood there taking in the scenery. It was already rather dark and the woods were almost completely silent, but right as I was about to continue my walk I heard footsteps rapidly getting louder. It was a child running towards me, and as soon as it realized I was there it started to repeatedly scream, "Run, he is coming," or variations of that same sentiment. I was a bit perplexed by the situation, so I watched the child run past me without moving an inch myself. It didn't take another second for a much more weighty pair of footsteps to appear. I could make out a silhouette in the distance which seemed to be their origin, and at that exact point in time I got really scared. As opposed to running I decided to hide in the chapel next to the altar, and after tripping over an old broken chapel bench I reached my hiding place. The footsteps got louder and louder, but right as they approached the vicinity of the chapel they suddenly went silent. About 15 seconds of complete quietness had passed just for the words, "Oi, you idiot, left your kebab on the bench," to break the silence. Turns out it was a resident of the very same street I inhabit. His nephew was visiting and he wanted to race him to the kebab stand. I don't know whether this was the right place to post this. Ultimately this is more stupid than creepy. My friend and I were chilling in the woods one day back in high school and see a dog walking by, later followed by this kid. He looked troubled, so we asked if he needed help. He obliged, telling us he was dog sitting for his friend and the dog got loose. So we spent a good hour following this dog and kid around, going deeper and deeper into the woods. Eventually I finally got the dog to come to me, but it wasn't wearing a collar, so I wasn't able to get a hold. My friend and I look away for just few seconds to discuss strategy, and when we turn back around the boy and the dog are both gone. It was like they completely vanished. Keep in mind it was autumn, so any footsteps could be heard from quite afar. But it was just silent, not a single trace of them anywhere. Still don't really know what happened. Maybe they ran away real quick? Who knows? Was definitely enough to creep us out though. I was hiking in northern Quebec, doing some exploration work for geologists. The thing about northern Quebec is that it has forests, mountains, hills. Pretty much all green, black and gray, except that in the middle of a forest we hiked through, we found this strange all-yellow patch of grass in a perfect circle, about the diameter of a medium-sized house. It was almost perfectly flat too. Caught us off guard. When I was about 7 or 8, my parents sent me to a local summer camp that they would pick me up from in the afternoons. I never really liked it because the kids were mean, everything was either broken or not clean, and the counselors obviously didn't care. I remember the girls' changing room had a door that led out to the woods, but the doorknob was gone, so it was unlocked all the time and you could see into it. This was primarily where the girls changed into their bathing suits, and there was usually someone blocking the view while we changed so the boys couldn't look in. Well, one day I'm changing alone and someone wasn't blocking the door. I look over and see an eye peeping in through the hole watching me change. I pull the rest of my clothes back on quickly and run out to tell my twin brother. I tell my dad that I don't want to go back to the camp anymore, and he begrudgingly takes us out of the camp pretty soon after because he knew how much we hated it. Years later, the camp has been closed down for many years, and I'm asking my dad about it. He gets really grim and tells me it shut down because a 13-year-old boy had raped a 7-year-old girl in the woods right behind the girls' bathroom a few weeks after I had told him about someone watching me change. Was working in a forest in East Africa for a while. Was getting seriously dark and we were hiking back to the car. The wind was quite strong but you could still hear some ruffling in the leaves, and as I turned around, I saw something quite big in the shrubs. Was a leopard. I shrieked and some guy from the group shot into the air to scare the animal away. I am glad he didn't shoot the animal but was still glad when the animal bolted out of there. I was jogging at night with headphones on in a park with dense trees and bushes. The overgrowth was taking over the path and it was difficult to see, so I turned the flashlight on my phone on. I started to see a fire burning ahead but couldn't really make it out. I take my glasses off when I jog. As I got closer there's a clearing and I see a big fire raging and no one around. So I pause a minute and fish my glasses out and find out that yes, there's 6 people standing there actually. Perfectly spaced apart from each other, and they all turned at the same time to look at me. I turned 180 and sprinted out of there. Edit: the path I jog on at night is nice and bright because the city of Winnipeg uses those LED street lights now. The wooded area leads to a small area called Don Gary Park, where I get to a bench and take a minute to reflect on my day and my goals for tomorrow. Also, the bench I rested at right beside this police launch dock for the Red River. I have never not felt safe there. My friends and I have speculated that the 6 dudes I saw were probably police just blowing off steam on a quiet night. This was quite a few years ago now, but me and my friend had this really cool spot to hang out, in the woods. You had to walk in the middle of a creek for a km and duck through sharp bushes and thistles. The hike was well rewarding though. The spot was about half an acre big. It was pure green grass on an incline with beautiful clear water ponds everywhere. There was tons of wildlife and the butterflies lived there. So there was always tons of butterflies. So the story begins on the way to this place. My friend Levi and I were walking along the river on the way to the spot. It was in the middle of a valley and nobody else ever went down there. Suddenly Levi stopped moving and ducked into a bush. I did the same because I thought there must have been a large animal somewhere. I saw him staring up the hill and so I looked up too. There was 2 people standing at the top of the hill heaving back and forth a lifeless body. We watched as they threw the lifeless corpse down the hill as it bounced off the trees and eventually got stuck on a tree at the bottom. Then they took off. Me and him were terrified and I was shaking so badly I couldn't speak. So we decided to verify it was a real body. Levi got about 4 feet away before screaming, "It has nostrils. It's real. Run." So of course, we take off running, and I glance back to see the 2 people run back to the top of the hill. Me and him ran 2 kilometers through thick brush and trees to get away from them. The next day we were with his parents driving to town. And we saw like 10 fire trucks at the school closest to the forest. Terrified we told his parents, bawling our eyes out worried that we were going to get murdered. His mom started laughing at us and said, "They are training for search and rescue. That was a dummy that the firemen had to find." I never slept as good as I did that night. I was a cook on board several NOAA research ships. Up in the Bering Sea, I saw what appeared to be a massive, black, triangular-shaped craft dive under the water. I viewed it from a distance of maybe 2 nautical miles. I was on a camping trip with some friends of mine and we found like 7 or 8 chipmunks and squirrels all in a pile, but they were all dead without arms or legs. This is probably less scary than a lot of the other posts, but I was pretty sure I was going to be the nameless victim at the start of a horror movie to show how dangerous the monster is. Basically, my dad and I were walking through the woods when we came across a young moose leg lying on the ground. It looked like it had been violently torn off with no sign of the rest of the moose anywhere. It was fresh with blood still on the wound, probably no more than a couple hours old. My dad is a pretty skilled hunter, so he handed me his axe that he was carrying and told me to watch for wolves while he started looking for tracks. After a little bit he came back saying, "That's weird, normally if it was wolves you'd be able to find paw prints, but I can't see any. Also no bear prints, so I have no idea what killed this." And so I'm like, "You didn't find any tracks at all?" And his very reassuring response was, "Well, I did find what appears to be the mama moose tracks headed this way, showing me the tracks. You can see how her stride is a lot longer here. Whatever killed her baby, she didn't want to fight it, she just took off running." He then pulls out his bear spray and holds it at the ready as we kept walking deeper into the woods with the UN named non-track leaving predator armed with bear spray and an axe. I was mountain biking in the woods and I came across an East Asian looking man in a perfectly fitted suit and a briefcase, just casually walking through the woods. In Auburn, Alabama in 2008. It was Halloween and we Googled haunted houses. I can't remember what the website was like or if there even was one, but it was like 45 minutes away. I know that it wasn't like a big attraction and we figured it was on someone's land and would be like a local deal. We drove out there at like 10 p.m. This was before iPhones and GPS, so we had MapQuest directions. We ended up going down a pretty country road for a while with no street lights, then turned down a legit dirt road that went through the woods. Pitch black. Went down it for like 10 minutes and finally saw an old house with a sign by the driveway that was handwritten and said haunted house. No other cars or lights or people anywhere. We pulled in the driveway and sat there for a second like, alright, this is messed up, we should leave. All of a sudden an old pickup truck turned on about 15 feet in front of us facing us, lights shining right in our faces. It started driving towards us, down their own driveway. We backed out and peeled out. It followed us, like almost bumping our rear end. Right on our tail down this pitch black dirt road in the middle of the Alabama woods. We were flipping our shit. It was Texas Chainsaw Massacre / Hills Have Eyes stuff. He stayed on our tail blinding us and almost bumping us all the way back home until we got off our exit and he finally let us go. No idea who was driving. I always think what would have happened if we got out of the car when we were in the driveway. In a patch of trees off of a field near where I keep my horse there's one of those big oil drums sealed up with a very heavy boulder on top. The only way it could have got there is being placed by a tractor or some sort of heavy lifting equipment. My partner and I tried to push it off but no luck. I don't know why but it creeps me out every time I see it. I regularly walk my dogs past it to see if they show any interest, but honestly after watching them look for a toy that was clearly in my lap I'm not sure I have much faith in them anymore. Update: thanks to everyone who commented, y'all made me realize that it could be something a bit creepier than I first thought, so I've reported it to 101. The officer I spoke to didn't sound particularly interested, but at least I know it's out of my hands and I don't have to live with guilt if something is found. I intended on getting up there myself yesterday to have a look, but I had a pretty brutal physio session that left me pretty much incapacitated for the day. I'm off up tonight after work, so hopefully if the police haven't got there before me I might still be able to take some pictures for everyone. I thought my better half had taken a photo of it before, but I can't seem to find it in her phone. Anyway, thanks again guys for putting the fear in me and making me do the right thing. Camping with 3 girls at a campsite far out in the woods with nobody else around for miles. The temp had dropped to 39°F and we were freezing our asses off after tripping on shrooms all day and smoking to keep warm. We heard a weird laughter and then screaming in the woods near us. It was actually terrifying because we couldn't identify if it was a child or something else. When I was a kid, I used to live on a tiny property in the woods. My house was basically built around where stables were once. My room was, back when it was still stables, where the hay was stocked. Before getting to the creepy thing I need to say some other stuff. When you were in my room you could sometimes smell hay out of nowhere. My dog was always refusing to go upstairs because something was scaring the shit out of it there. You could sometimes hear knocking on doors. There were 3 entrance doors in my house, sometimes all at once. Now that this have been said, we can go to the fun thing. So my room had a big ass window that gave a big view over the woods and my garden was basically a clearing. Once, I heard a kid giggling from upstairs. I ran there only to find my window open, and something running out in the woods. I spent 2 more years in this house and felt insecure the whole time. I was in a large wooded area near my BF's home, with him, hanging out nearly at midnight. We had gone in pretty deep and it required a good amount of climbing. The closest path was maybe 5 to 7 minutes climbing down, so it was highly unlikely someone could be at that spot, that time of the night, besides us. He thought he saw a shadow move 20 to 25 feet to the left of us, climbing, but it stopped suddenly when my BF looked at it. He told me to be wary. In that exact moment we saw a dark figure climbing a little up but diagonally, like he tried to go directly above where we were. We didn't move and watch him till he closed the horizontal gap and was directly above us, maybe 15 feet of steep downhill thick forest. Then he began to come towards us. Without skipping a bit my BF grabbed my hand and we almost ran downhill till the path. We made it in less than 2 minutes while still holding hands and listening to the man running behind us. We ran as fast as we could down the path and out of the forest where there was a cafe and some basketball and tennis courts next to the wooded hill, and of course, people. As we realized we came really close to be mugged or worse, we vowed never to go there at night again. Not sure if this is the kind of story you're looking for, but it's a fun one to tell, so here you go. I used to work in low-income home weatherization. basically giving free shit away to help lower electricity and gas bills and make the home more comfortable to people who really needed it, installing doors and insulation and so forth. One step in qualifying a home is testing combustion appliances to make sure they're not emitting carbon monoxide into the living space, because if they are and we seal up the house we could kill the whole family. During a pre-inspection of a home on the outskirts of the city, I asked to see the owner's water heater. He tells me that it's in the basement, which is fairly normal, and I tell him I have to inspect it before work can start. So, he goes into the kitchen and starts moving the refrigerator. Turns out the entry into the basement is underneath carpeting beneath the fridge. I should note that I went and did thousands of homes over the years, and had never seen such a thing. But, whatever, needs to be done regardless, and so I pull out my flashlight and shine it down the stairs, to check out the layout but really to look for black widow spiders. At this point I notice a dead cat, mostly down to a skeleton. Not my favorite sight but really common in crawl spaces and basements. I take a few steps down the stairs and continue my spider check, and notice another couple of small animal skeletons. At this point I start to worry about gas, or poisons, or something equally dangerous, and start looking closer. There are animal skeletons everywhere, at least on a cursory look. Some of them are so degraded I can't determine what they used to be. I also happen to notice that this guy is waiting at the entrance a little too quietly, with his hand on the door. Something clicks in my brain and I get this immense sense of danger. I'm about 4 steps from the door being clear to close. I have no partner on the job with me, there's death all around me, and I realize just how hidden the entrance to the basement really was. I noped out, told the guy I needed extra tools and would be back, and marked the job as non-feasible for health and safety as I was driving away. I have no idea if I was actually in any danger, it could have been completely innocent, but I still remember the adrenaline rush and sense of doom, and sometimes you just don't take chances. When I was younger I went elk hunting with my uncle and some of his friends, and had an experience I'll never forget. One of the days I went on a hunt with his buddy Tyler. Tyler gets an elk down about 30 minutes before dark. We get over to it and as we are cleaning it we start hearing wolves howl in the distance, slowly getting closer. Every minute that passes the smell of death gets thicker, the sky gets darker, and the wolves get closer. It's dark now. All I can see is what's directly in the beam of my mini maglite and Tyler's hackbill light as he works on the elk as fast as he can while I keep a watch on the wolves. We are surrounded. I don't know how many there are. Feels like dozens. It was probably only a few. I can hear them running circles around us and yelping back and forth at each other. Occasionally I get sight of them in the light and then they're gone. Every once in a while, one would get brave and dart in within a few feet and try snagging a piece of the elk. Finally the elk is cleaned and we have the scent circle around the carcass to keep it somewhat safe. Now all that was left was a 3-mile hike back to camp, completely covered in blood and being trailed by wolves. By far the most horrifying experience of my life. Editing to add a few things. Sorry I've been fishing with my kids for Father's Day. First off, for the people saying it was coyotes and how wolves are rare, I live in Idaho. Wolves are not rare by any stretch. Look up the 1995 wolf reintroduction to the Frank Church Wilderness. And they have exploded in numbers since then. I'll try finding a dated map with all the packs we have in Idaho. Secondly, we didn't break down the animal that night. We wanted to get out of there so we just gutted the animal so the innards didn't spoil the meat and left it overnight. November at 10,000 feet is plenty cold to keep bugs and bacteria from getting to the meat. We came back with the whole camp of 8 guys first thing the next morning and got it processed out. Small town in a relatively rural area. A few years after the fact, I'm now relatively certain it was a skinwalker. About 10 years ago, I was at my dad's house for the weekend in Kentucky. The Appalachian people are very superstitious, hailing from the Scots-Irish people and just never losing that side of them. My dad wasn't superstitious, I thought, and was not one to be easily scared. It was about, I dunno, 10 at night and we randomly decided to go into town to get some McDonald's. Daddy always insisted on walking in front of me and I always assumed it was so I wouldn't accidentally step on a snake, but now I don't think that's the case. So, he turned on the porch light and opened the screen door. He had put one foot on the porch and there was this awful sound. I will never in my life forget it. There was a screech followed by the sound of a crow, but it wasn't a crow. The best way I can describe it is if a person was mimicking a crow call. My hair stood up on the back of my neck and my dad retreated into the house. He slammed the big door and locked it, something I had never seen him do. Before I could ask a question he said, "It isn't safe." We can go tomorrow morning." And so we did. But the rest of the night, we stayed inside. My dad didn't even go outside to smoke a cigarette. He even let the outside dog stay in the house. We never talked about that again, but that was one of the scariest moments of my life. Went walking in the woods while camping with an old boyfriend to where the road ended and found a giant underground cage. After exploring, we started kissing and suddenly heard little kids giggling all around us. Hightailed it out of there and never looked back. I am a night owl, so used to stay up late at the computer lab on my university campus. It was open until 2 a.m. I was walking home and there were about 4 to 6 people covered in burlap robes and giant hoods, sitting cross-legged on the quad. The next morning, they were still there. It was a chicken wire and burlap art piece. Found a deer with its hind end ate up. Few feet away was a coyote with the hind end ate up, then another few feet away a fox with its hind end ate up. Nothing else was there, no bullet holes or signs of an arrow or anything else. Couldn't find any tracks from other people or animal. It was pretty creepy. Found in the hills of W.V. Cowlitz River, Washington State. Camping with my dad and sister, me buddies, early 90s. Something was throwing rocks and sticks into our camp. We shined a flashlight out and caught a reflection of eyes and a silhouette. Very, very tall. Kept throwing stuff in our camp randomly for about 15 minutes. We just stoked the fire really high. In the morning I woke up to heavy footsteps in our camp and something reeked. Woke up my dad. He shook the tent and yelled. Whatever it was ran off. My boyfriend and I were backpacking through rural Tasmania a few years ago. While on a bus, we were discussing our plans for the ensuing 2 weeks. The girl in the seat in front turns around and offers us a place to stay in her town. We declined as we were headed elsewhere first, but she gave us her mobile number and said that she and her partner would love to have us. A few days later we decide to take them up on their offer. We call her, and she says they're happy to host us. So far so good. They meet us at the train station and immediately something feels off. It's really difficult to explain, but it's that primal, ineffable feeling in your guts that tells you that something isn't right. We ignored our guts and followed them. They lead us straight out of town. We ask them where we're going and they say that they live on the outskirts. This town is so creepy. It's an old mining town that has been largely abandoned, and as we walk the 15-odd minutes to their home, the houses get shittier, with boarded-up windows, overgrown gardens and no people in sight. Eventually we reach the house at the very end of the town. It's their house. We go in. Set up in the middle of the living room is a single mattress with a sheet hanging around it. They show us around the house except for one door which stays closed. When I asked what was behind it, they pretended not to hear. Our room has a made bed, chest of drawers, and looks like a normal room. It seems weird that they sleep on mattresses in the living room when they have a guest room. We go back into the living room and look around. Knives. A lot of knives. My boyfriend asks if they go hunting. No. The partner hands one of the knives to my boyfriend and asks him to open it. It's a massive Bowie knife with what looks like blood staining around the edges of the blade. My boyfriend laughs awkwardly and sets it down. They have a tattoo gun, to practice. My boyfriend asks if they have any tattoos. No. There's a small axe at the door. I ask if they collect wood. No. Suddenly the guy says he wants to go to the shops. We agree quickly because we're creeped out and want to get back into the town. The 4 of us leave and they start walking in the opposite direction to the town. I say that the town is back the other way. The guy says this way would be more interesting because it goes up through the trees. He says that they have never been up the mountain before, but he knows the area and it would take the same amount of time. I tell my boyfriend that I'm freaking out, but he thinks it's okay. We follow them into the trees. The path goes up the mountain. We are going in the total opposite direction of the town. The girl turns around to her partner and whispers, "So where was the place again?" My boyfriend and I freeze. I say I want to take the road back to town and start walking. When the 4 of us arrive in the one shop in town, no one recognizes the couple. And this is a really small town. We make an excuse that we want to go look at sites and that we'll catch up with them later, and instead book a hotel room and freak out. I did some snooping on the area. Their house had an extra room, behind the mystery door, and a basement. The path that we were taking led straight out of town and up the mountain. There was no way it could loop back into town, so yeah, pretty sure we narrowly avoided being murdered. Or maybe they were just massive weirdos. To be honest, the creepiest thing was the fact that there was no drug paraphernalia at all. The state of the house and the weird behavior would have been understandable if they were intoxicated, but that wasn't the case. I was walking my dog through the woods and she'd find the odd bone, thought nothing of it, but then she ran towards a huge black sack and was going nuts for it. I open the bag and it's filled with bones. Kinda weird, but I'm still like, okay, just be hunters around or something. But then I walk a bit further and start seeing more and more bags, then a huge cluster of them, at least 20 right there, all filled with bones. I decided my dog had a long enough walk after seeing that. I was driving home after an extremely late night at work. I lived in the middle of nowhere. About a mile before I got there, a woman covered in blood jumped out of the woods into the middle of the road screaming. I panicked and went around her, then slammed on the brakes to help. Her boyfriend had beaten her and was currently chasing after her in the woods. I got her in my car and called the police. They met us at the hospital because I told them there was no way I was waiting on the side of the road when he was coming. Not in any of those places, but I was a kid and was in this hotel-like place, went to public toilet, guy walks in, gray skin, eyes/pupils really small like a zombie's eyes. He was just staring at me. Safe to say I got out of Dodge real fast. I was driving through rural parts of Missouri with a buddy. We drove down a single-lane road that had no exit. At the end of the road, there was a group of deer corpses laid in a perfect circle. I'd say there was at least 10 deer. We BTFO real quick. There's a section of Joshua Tree National Park called Samuelson's Rocks where an old Swedish prospector who lost his mind used to live. He carved all sorts of crazy sayings into the rocks. During the day they look pretty neat. At night in a lightning storm they look like something of Lovecraft. Went on a mountain hike in Transylvania with a group of friends from school, and way up, after maybe 12 to 14 kilometers of trekking, we saw a house, was in the middle of nowhere. It had a barn, with a few animals, couple of cows, chicken, etc. As we get closer, we see a few people, a guy and 5 to 6 women. Not sure if there were more inside. The dude comes to greet us, barely speaking the language. We had a hard time understanding what he's saying. They lived without electricity, gas, anything. This is in the early 90s, so there's no internet, mobile phones to worry about. At least for most people. Anyway, they all looked weird, kinda dumb expressions on their face. We can barely understand each other. They asked us who's the president now, and if we want some milk. They look at our clothes and shoes weirdly, curious, like who knows when is the last time they had human contact. Or maybe there were more crazies around those parts, dunno. Not sure to this day what was going on. It's not typical in the region, so we kinda freaked out, especially cause the dude looked a bit disturbed, and we were too young. We were looking around to see if there's more of them. Paranoia was getting to us, thinking there must be a village nearby. What was also weird is that all the women kept their distance, and never got close to us, like he was guarding them, or checking us out, if it's safe for them. One of my friends kept saying we don't want their milk, and we need to go, cause it's getting dark. We walked calmly for a while, then when we thought we're out of their sight, bolted like crazy out of there. Needless to say, we camped after a few hours, and we always had one person awake to keep watch. We told people that were living in the villages near that area, about the mountain people, and they didn't believe us. They said nobody lives there, up in the mountains. This happened 7 years back. I was living in a rented house where we had 2 bathrooms. One of them was broken and unusable. It smells really bad when you open the bathroom door. I always have this one bolted and locked. One night, a thunderstorm was approaching the city. The power went off since the winds were too strong. I was there sitting all alone in the living room when I heard thudding sound coming from the bathroom. I thought it could be because of the air pressure difference due to the thunderstorm. Continued on to do my assignments. And there was a loud thud and I swear I saw the bathroom door open. I freaked out and left the house and stayed at the terrace until the power came. I don't know where the lock went and how the fuck it opened. When I went back in, the door was partly closed. Locked it tight and tied it with a rope. Obviously I chickened out of that house in a couple of weeks. Never going near there again. I work as an autopsy technician. It's pretty regular happening, and doesn't faze me now, but the first time I heard a remains exhale/moan was pretty creepy. Not creepy per se, but definitely scared the shit out my friends and I made on property that we didn't know was restricted. It was right around sundown. We had hiked for a while to a clearing we had been at many times. On a ridge 0.25 miles away or so, see a woman on a horse. Bottles are falling out of her saddle and she seemed inebriated. She was slurring and yelling at us about her property, and then pulled out a revolver and fired multiple shots in our direction. So we ran scared shitless and never went back there. On a sailboat at sea I had a lucid dream in which my future self and child self came into the movie theater I had been in my normal dream, and the movie that had been playing morphed into a long, detailed, painful, joyous movie of my entire life that I am still somewhere in the middle of. The little girl held my hand and the old woman patted it, both as if to say keep working to make us proud and simultaneously, don't worry, you made us proud. I know it's not quite an answer but it was so lucid it felt like I saw it. People will call me crazy but whatever. I was camping once, walked through the woods and ended up coming across two camping young women. They looked like they were from the 1970s. I sat with them for a long time talking and laughing. I noticed she had a calendar with her that said 1975 on it but I didn't say anything because I didn't want her to feel embarrassed about it. Ended up falling asleep and woke up later and both the women and all their camping equipment was gone. I was just lying in grass. Walked back to my campsite and never told anyone about it to this day. I still don't understand what happened to those women, or if that was even real. While hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail, I was ready to quit for the night and saw a clear spot with no pine cones or sticks to remove. I assumed someone had cleared it before me but when I stepped on the spot the earth sank like it had just been put there. I slept on the spot but pondered about it. The next morning it became clear that someone had dug up that spot and then covered it. I think I slept on someone's recent grave. Was a high schooler mid-90s. Went fishing off the coast of Corpus Christi with uncle and cousins. We were about 18 miles out. Been out all day. Was around 8 p.m. and we're gearing up to head back in. It was before DSD so sun was already going down and getting dark. I was at the stern bringing in the traps. As I'm pulling it and I see this glow about 100 to 150 feet off. It's nothing I have ever seen. Best way I can describe it. It's like if you stuck a toaster underwater and the orange glowing elements were still working. But still not quite. And it was very large. We were on a 38 feet boat, all I can guess it was 5 to 6 times bigger. Kind of hard to judge sizes on open water. The water above it is not churning but you can tell that it is disturbing it. IDK hard to explain. Almost like it was pushing the water up. This whole time I'm expecting something to break the surface and just frozen. You know, like when you're walking the dog or something at night not really paying attention and a cat or possum runs out. How you freeze and everything stops. I'm like that the whole time. Finally I let out a call to my uncle. He comes around, stops right by me. He's not saying anything, just kind of like me. This thing, object or whatever the hell, just jets out towards the Gulf. I'm talking like not picking up speed. Instantly jets out. All I say is, you seen that before? My uncle just says nope, let's go. I say absolutely nothing the way back and he doesn't either. My cousins ask us what happened. All my uncle says is nothing. Now what could it have been? I've researched it on and off for past 25 years. Especially when the internet came out. I've found a lot of people seeing something very similar. There's a naval base down there but no sub-bases we know about. It kind of took over my life for a lot of years. If we have something like that though. We've been holding out on technology that could change our lives. Kinda late to the post but one thing will always stick with me. I was probably about 14 or so on a camping trip with my scout troop out in the middle of nowhere. Literally hiked into the woods for about 40 miles and set up camp. No phones, no way of contacting the outside, just us and some of our parents fishing and hiking, etc. Anyways, second night into the trip, my dad, myself and 2 other parents are sitting around the campfire talking and get on the subject of UFOs. We start talking about different stories we'd seen on TV shows and such. Right in the middle of a story my friend's dad points up at the sky and goes, "Holy shit, what's that?" We thought he was joking around for a good minute till he goes, "Seriously, turn around, Terry's more." We all turn around finally and see 3 massive, and I mean massive, fireballs screaming down from the sky towards the earth. They look like they're going in slow motion, or maybe time just seemed to slow down, but it took forever for them to disappear behind the tree line. Naturally we're all freaked out and started talking about what it could be, but there's no way of finding out for at least 3 more days. The hike out of the woods was the worst. Just walking quietly contemplating what could be waiting and what the world might be like if our worst fears happened while we were in there. Turns out a Russian satellite had broken up and fallen to Earth that night and it was seen for miles and miles. Still the creepiest 3 days of my life. Okay, so one time back when I was like 11, me and my friend were walking through the woods because he said he had something he wanted to show me. We walked down the path for a good 20 minutes until he suddenly started walking through some closely planted thin trees. Despite my confusion, I followed him until he suddenly stopped in a clearing and there was a round mud hut in front of us. He told me he was too scared to go inside, so I did instead. The floor was lower down than the floor itself and there was a little fire put in the center. It was surrounded by DIY wooden bench things. Although that was odd in itself, the real showstopper were the walls. Every inch of the mud walls were covered in animal skulls held up by wire. These would range from a small sparrow skull to a deer skull. It was a pretty neat sight TBF. Outside of the hut was another small bench which had the phrase "where heaven and earth meet" carved into it. Cut to January of this year and me and my mom tried to find the weird voodoo hut again in the woods. While we did come across the hut, it had sadly been demolished and all but a few of the skulls had been taken. It just kinda looked like someone had jumped on top of it after stealing all of the skulls for the what I can only imagine to be some vulture culture collection. It's kinda sad it had to go, but I still remember like it was yesterday. Edit, wow. Thanks so much for the upvotes. I saw a comment suggesting this might be for a film shoot, but I think this is very unlikely as the fen was left there for multiple of years and it looked like it had taken such a long time to find and tie up the skulls. There's only one school in the area and it's a small primary school. This was hardly anyone's project. Went camping for wife and I's anniversary 1 year in Payson near the rim. Went to bed. So eerie to hear nothing but the wind in the pines. Finally fell asleep. Woke up with paralysis and a red light glowing outside our tent. The light got brighter and something started unzipping our tent. I was frozen in place just staring at the flap being unzipped. When the flap was almost opened, I was able to move my head and look at my wife's face. She had this horrible look of fear, mouth agape and everything. When she started to scream, I woke up, with nothing but the wind and the PIEA and pitch black. Nothing opened our tent, and we were still laying where we fell asleep. Do I think it was a nightmare? Yeah, I'm terrified of aliens and stories about them. Maybe it was my brain messing with me, or was it a repressed memory? Who knows? Scared the shit out of me. We left the next day. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.